We'll start by saying the pledge. If you would join me, please. I pledge allegiance to the
flag
flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll begin by talking about amendments to the agenda. Do any of you have an agenda amendment? Mr. Boyce?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Three things. I'm going to need to be excused at 1 o'clock. I have an important SOD meeting in Bandon, but I can be available by phone from 1 to 2, if that'll help. I think we have a public hearing scheduled for 1:30, and I'm, of course, very interested in that. Number 2, on the agenda, the consent calendar, item B, I don't know, is that Roman numeral 2? The BOC office packet for the county administrators, so I'd like to discuss that.
So you want that taken out?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we'll put that right after public comments.
Then 11A, just a quick question for Council Huddle. I just assumed on the coordination letter, Mr. Huddle, that we were going to be voting on that today. Is that not an action item today, or what was your thoughts on that?
We are going to be, we're going to be presenting the draft and then essentially getting board direction. So there would be a vote as to how to, whether it's acceptable, number one, and then how to carry it out. When you know, if that answers your question. Mm-hmm. So
Thank
basically,
you.
yeah, we'll look for board direction on it, and to make sure we're tracking what the board's desires are on that item.
Madam Chair, just so you know, my preference and concern is that we follow through with that today if the board agrees. So it's a very important matter. So
we're going to be meeting again next week, so
1 week. Yeah.
1 week, I think you can handle it.
Okay, but fire season is on its way, so, and that's just one of the many emergencies that we have to be concerned with. So I'm sorry for any delay. I don't know why we couldn't vote today, but I've stated my concern there. Thank you.
Any other agenda amendments?
None for me.
Council Huddle?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had asked to add one item, and that would be an order authorizing an order authorizing me to sign the closing documents on the Pine Street property. If you remember, we are in a purchase and sale agreement on the Pine Street property, and the closing date is not a commissioner date, and so it's just a matter of having someone available to sign closing documents. And so I would request, it looks like this. It says
right.
Yeah, an order to sign closing documents. I think it could be added to old business, but essentially all it does is designate me as the person to sign the closing documents, so when the call comes in, we don't have to convene a quorum or do anything like that, and it's really just carrying out, executing the decision already made by the board on the purchase and sale. So that's something I'd like to add at call it old business. It's
8D?
Okay, so
Sure.
Why don't we call that D, closing documents on Pine Street?
And then I don't know that these are agenda amendments so much, but I had then submitted a couple of revisions to documents, one on the zoning ordinance and the other on the Brookings Airport.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just talking about the revised order language on that, I don't think those are really agenda amendments, but just have some revised documents.
Well, and both items are already on the agenda.
Correct.
So I could just add that information to it. Yes.
That's the amended agenda, correct? Because they weren't
Thank
on the
you.
original. There wasn't
Okay.
even a
Well,
time for a public hearing, period.
Right. So I wonder if Commissioner Huxley is bringing up a good point. Perhaps the board needs to approve adding the zoning ordinance. We've sent it out as a supplemental packet, so I think that item needs to be added to the agenda as a public hearing at 1:30 with the zoning ordinance materials.
Okay, so a public hearing,
Do you know what I'm talking about? It's the...
it's number 7.
Right, and I don't know that it got on the agenda, but it's what happened was some of the documents were submitted, I think, back in April, and they got put in, John Jesuit put them into a file called public hearing, but they didn't go into the May 30th agenda. So when we published the agenda, Director Johnson asked where her materials were, and she resubmitted them. They're not really a late submittal, they were just put somewhere else. But
Were they in the
she's-
Y drive? Because I remember reading...
I honestly don't know what drive they were in, but nevertheless, and if I'm not mistaken, this is a final action after the public hearing on the number of planning commissioners. So if you've already seen the
Right.
item before and you had a public hearing on it, and this is you directed staff to bring back an order. So that's what it is. And what happened is Director Johnson noticed in the newspaper per planning law that there would be a hearing today, and she did that again back a while back, and then these materials didn't get placed in our agenda packet folder. They got placed in a separate folder. So again, it's really recommended that be put on the agenda today at 1:30.
Okay, so we'll put that...
And I don't think there's any harm to the board so much because, again, this is the final action to adopt what you had directed after the public hearing on the zone change ordinance.
So do you want that under C, 7C?
It would be a public hearing, so yes.
Okay. And so that would be the amended, and if people didn't get a chance to read that, they can do it during lunch, I guess. Amended.
What's 7B then?
7B is the first reading of the ordinance, so maybe we should switch
Okay,
it.
you're looking at the revised one that
Yeah.
just came out yesterday afternoon.
Oh, okay.
See, we got 2 different agendas.
I see. So 7A, we do have the Curry County zoning ordinance on I have something here called an amended agenda, and it's got 7A. It's already got the zoning ordinance.
Okay, so
in
we'll just
there.
include that.
Yeah, so I suppose it's it would be to adopt an amended agenda, because the amended agenda that is at your places hasn't really been adopted. It was sent out by staff.
So do you want a motion on that for adoption?
Well, we'll just see. We've got, so far, that's 2 items that were added, I believe. One
And 2
being-
that were, well, 1 that was moved, so,
Yeah.
out of the consent calendar.
So from the original agenda that did not include the zoning ordinance change, that would be an amendment proposed to be under 7A. The original amendment did not include, or the original agenda that was published on Friday did not include my request to have an order authorizing me to sign the closing documents on the Pine Street. So that
Right.
was an addition. And then Commissioner Boyce wanted to remove a budget appropriation transfer BOC office. He
Yeah,
wanted
we'll
to
put
just-
that right under
Yep.
public comment.
So those are the 3 amendments that I think the board is faced with, and then that would require a motion to approve that unless there's any other amendments or questions
Okay,
on
any
those
other
items.
amendments to the agenda? Okay, let's get a motion to approve the agenda as amended, please.
So move, Madam Chair.
I'll second it.
Call for the question?
Aye.
Director
Aye.
Johnson would like to address the board.
Oh, okay.
Just so
Director
I'm
Johnson?
clear, the public hearing notice for the zoning code amendment item was for 1:30.
Right.
So I just want to make sure, because
We'll
if
make sure
folks
that
come
it
at
happens.
1:30, then, yeah, okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks. Commissioner
So,
Huxley?
but on the amended agenda yesterday afternoon, it's showing the Parks Committee subject also. Now, is that also at 1:30? Because there was I didn't see any time for it. It showed as an ordinance, but I didn't, under public hearing, but no time.
Correct.
So is that at 1:30 also?
It's not slotted for a time. It's just slotted for a public hearing to take public comments on it. Director Johnson actually published in the newspaper, because land use, when you have public hearings on land use, you have different publication requirements. And so she did newspaper publication and said, this hearing will be at 1:30 for this item. And so that has a 1:30 time. Otherwise, our agenda just has a public hearing element to it. Yep. And so there is no time requirement on the public hearing on the Parks Ordinance, but it will be a public hearing where you take comment.
Okay.
So.
Good enough. Okay, so we have now adopted the agenda as amended. Next, let's go to public comments. I've got one public comment. David Barnes.
Oh, I've been handed a second one here,
Okay.
or a third perhaps. Thank you.
Thank you.
Morning, I'm David Barnes. I just gave you an article that I read last week from the Daily Historian, and it kind of surprised me when I read it to learn that 35% of the people in Curry County were prescribed an opioid in 2015. That puts us at number 74 nationwide out of 3,140 counties in this country. We're number 74 in the percentage of our population that was prescribed an opioid in 2015. To me, that's kind of alarming. There's a lawsuit that a lot of counties across the country are entering, going after the pharmaceutical companies, blaming them a lot for the opioid addiction. I come from pharmaceutical land. When I pulled out of my old house, I turned left, I went 6 miles, I was at Pfizer Pharmacy as world headquarters. If I made a right and went 6 miles, I was at Merck Pharmaceuticals world headquarters. So I know what the pharmaceutical world is like, and I've seen the way the executives live. They were my neighbors. Betty Merck was my neighbor. I would like to encourage the county to please join into this lawsuit. It could help the people who are using opioids in this county. I'm sure that most of them are legal and are prescribed and used for the purpose that they are necessary, but like anything else, I'm sure that there's some that make their way into the black market and contribute to the drug problem that we have in our county. I believe this is a time-sensitive matter. I'm not sure. I was ill over the weekend and didn't get a chance to look into it any further. But there's 5 other counties in the state of Oregon who have joined this lawsuit. Whether it brings money to the actual people who are using the opioids and helps them some way, or if you put money back into the county coffers that we could provide enhanced services or treatments for people because of this. Either way, from what I understand, this is like the tobacco lawsuit. It doesn't cost us anything to join it, and we could benefit from it in the long run. And I come to you this morning to ask you, to encourage you to please consider joining into this lawsuit for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I'm not sure about the statistics. That sounds a little bit alarming, and I'm not quarreling with them, but I'm not sure how valid they might be. Nonetheless, as you well know, we lose 1,000 people, I think it's a week, in the country to this. Council Hub's been keeping up on this fairly well, and as you mentioned, there's potentially several counties in Oregon that are filing this suit. I contacted the Lane County Commissioners and got some good feedback just yesterday, or actually this morning. And so, I don't know, would we want to have a workshop on this, or do you want to? How might we proceed if this has got legitimacy? And I certainly think it's something we need to pursue. So is there interest on the board and direction we might go?
Well, I certainly want to do some research on it before I make a decision one way or another. I know personally I've been prescribed opioids for pain, didn't use one of them, so there could be a lot of people in that same situation. I don't know.
Right. Oh, I don't profess to know the people's situation. You know, I'm definitely not in favor of preventing people from getting medication that they need to ease what ails them. That's one of the reasons I moved here. My old state didn't provide that to me. So, you know, I'm definitely not opposed to people receiving medication. But when it becomes a problem, and, you know, I've seen what it does to people, like many of us have, and it scares me to think that if it's 1 out of 3 people in Curry County, that means that 3 people in this room at some point in the last year have been prescribed opioids for something. And whether our doctors are over-prescribing, or I know we're an elderly population in this county, and, you know, we go through a lot of elderly aches and pains and troubles, and things get prescribed for it. My mom gets prescribed opioids for her problems. So, you know, but if there's something, if the county can benefit from this, and we can benefit the people of this county by joining it, then, like I said, I'd like to encourage you to do it.
Commissioner Boyce?
I think there is an urgency, but I don't know, unable to determine in this kind of short notice other counties that may be involved that have actually, I think Clatsop County and Lane County definitely has filed a lawsuit, but I don't know if there's a deadline. So I wouldn't want to delay this too long in case there is a deadline. I'll do some more research on it. I can report back. And as Mr. Barnes said, the word generally is it doesn't cost the county to get involved, and it is, you had me listen to that 1-hour seminar a few months ago, and that was absolutely fascinating. So I'll get back to the board on that, but I would prefer not to have this drag on and take 2 or 3 months and lose some valuable time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Connie Hunter?
I'm Connie Hunter, and I live in South Curry County, and I'm glad to be a citizen of Curry County today and every day. I'd like to talk a little bit about the port recall, and I am very excited in a hard way that the Board of Commissioners will be appointing citizens to the Port of Brookings Harbor Port Commission. Chair Sue Gold, I have to tell you, of all the times that I've seen you working hard for our community, and there have been many, whether it was at the school board or at the port, I have seen you hold your ground at that port, standing beside Roy Davis, and I am grateful for that, and I've seen it in action. So I know you're going to be the greatest advocate for doing the right thing at the Port of Brookings Harbor when those new commissioners port commissioners are appointed. So I wanted to thank you for your rich and committed background to the Port of Brookings Harbor. Now, I know I can get up here and be hard sometimes, but I want you to know that comes from sincerity, experience, and watching you in action in that way. So thank you for that. I believe, and I encourage all of the Board of Commissioners, and of course, my heart goes out to those who are struggling with the results of this. But I encourage the Curry County Board of Commissioners to consider these prerequisites when appointing new port commissioners. First of all, significant knowledge of the port, personal integrity, and be a selfless leader and have the ability to learn from the staff and from the backbone, cornerstone, touchstone person on the Port Commission, and that would be Roy Davis. We hope the recall puts all local power grabbers on notice. Serving our community is a higher calling and should be treated as such. Thanks to Roy Davis for staying the course with us. The Hunter household is grateful, and Chair Sue Gold, I know you'll stay the court with us on this one too. Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. You can rest assured that I will.
Yes.
Okay, moving on. Consent calendar. No, not consent calendar. BOC office packet 14. Commissioner Boyce, you wanted that out?
Just understanding the supplemental budget process, Madam Chair, just so the public can know what additionally, I see Councilman Kallstrom coming up to the podium here. What was transferred or will be transferred into the budget for the county administrator? And I think it was to do with travel and related expenses. Do I have that correct?
Louise Kallstrom, County Accountant. This supplemental budget is to realign the actual transactions that happened during this past year regarding the interim county administrator, who was actually paid through professional services to, what's the name of that? Prothman, rather than what we budgeted for as being paid through payroll. So it's moving out of payroll and covering those expenses in professional services. The original budget also did not have any budget for that county administrator to have a cell phone, and so that he was assigned a cell phone, and that cost collected here, and it needs to be covered in that line item. Also, the next one was the transportation, and that was actually for the interviewees to travel here for that meet and greet and final interviews. It wasn't for the interim, it was for the applicants. And then the supplies non-capital was actually a computer for the acting or the interim county administrator that also was not budgeted for him to have a computer and laptop. So that's what I have done, is moved the salaries, some of the salary amounts out of what was provided for that county administrator, and moved down to where actually things were paid for that.
Commissioner Boyce, you had a question?
Thank you again. Did interim county administrator Hitt have a laptop?
Yes, it's included in this amount. I think what it was a laptop for the county administrator and a monitor, so that he had double monitors. So the total amount was for a laptop and a second monitor.
But didn't we just transfer Mr. Hitt's laptop to Mr. Schroeder?
Oh, yes.
Okay, thank you.
It's just that these things were purchased during this past year.
Okay.
And we did not budget anything for these things. When we budgeted for the county administrator last year, we just budgeted for him to be paid, not to have a cell phone or a laptop, or for interviewees to travel here. So that's what I'm trying to.
Yeah, you're doing fine. So what is the amount that we're transferring?
We're transferring $64,150. 60 for the professional services, $350 for the cell phone, $2,000 for the travel, and $1,800 for the computer equipment.
Okay, just one more question, if you would. The pro services general, what that goes to 65, is that salary, right, or a portion of his salary?
That was what we paid Prothman.
Excuse me. Very good. Thank you.
For the services of an interim county administrator.
So, Madam Chair, I'm opposed to this transfer. Thank you. I don't know if it's going to be how it works in the consent in this regard.
Well, there's no deficit. There's no making up additional monies required. This is strictly in moving from salaries to essentially to professional services, and then a couple of smaller ones. It's
from appropriation level to appropriation level.
Nothing extra is coming from anywhere.
No.
It's all within this fund. So there's no net change.
So when we look at salaries regular, that's down by, what was it, 43,000 something?
Yes.
Okay, and so basically it's coming from that area, would you say, or?
Yes, it's just taking, taking the amount that was needed and prorating it against the salaries that were budgeted.
Okay.
So the proration is the total amount to all of these salary categories, the regular salary, benefits. So it just prorated that amount against the total of that. So I took
So
it.
basically, it's moving
I
from
didn't
line
move it
to
all
line.
from salaries. I moved it all
Okay.
from salaries and benefits.
Okay, so
Thank you, that's all I have.
do I have a motion to approve this supplemental budget as written?
Chair, I'll motion to approve the budget as written,
A
or
second?
the supplemental budget as written.
I'll second it. Any further discussion? Call for the question.
Aye.
No.
Aye. Okay, moving on to the consent calendar with the deletion of the BOC office packet, which would be BII. Do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar as written with that exception?
Would you repeat that, please?
Okay, the consent calendar with the BII, which is the BOC office, omitted. We've already talked about that.
Okay.
So do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar as
So
amended?
moved, Madam Chair.
I will second it.
Okay, any further discussion? Call for the question?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, moving on, we've got minutes, and I think I'll take these one at a time. We're looking for an approval to approve the general meeting minutes of October 18th. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes as written?
I'll motion to approve the minutes as written.
Do I have a second? I'll second that. Any discussion?
Yes.
Okay.
There was one additional change, and it was a spelling of a word. I didn't check it originally, but I saw it typed in an article, and it's on pages 10 of 13 and 11 of 13. The last name is Bay. It's spelled B-E-Y, and it should be B-A-Y.
Okay,
So that's it.
I think that's minor. Okay, I believe we were doing the discussion on this, so any further discussion? Call for the question?
Aye.
Aye.
No.
Okay, moving on to the general meeting of April 4th. Do we have a motion to approve those minutes as presented?
Chair, I will motion to approve the general meeting minutes of April 4th, 2018 as written.
Do we have a second? I'll second it. Do we have any discussion? Call for the question?
Aye.
Aye.
No.
Okay, next one was special meeting with executive session, April 6th. Do we have a motion to approve those minutes?
Chair, I'll motion to approve the minutes of the executive session for April 6, 2018 as written.
Do we have a second? I will second. Do we have any discussion? Call for the question.
Aye.
No.
Aye. Next, we have the executive session, April 7th. Do we have a motion to approve those minutes?
Chair, I'll motion to approve the minutes as written for the executive session held April 7th, 2018.
Do we have a second? I'll second that. Any discussion? Call for the question?
Aye.
No.
Aye. And then lastly, minutes for the general meeting, April 18th, 2018. Do we have a motion to approve
Chair, I'll
those?
motion to approve the minutes as written for the general meeting April 18th, 2018.
Do we have a second? I'll second that. Any discussion? Call for the question.
Aye.
Aye.
No.
Okay, next, Road Department bid award is Richard Christensen here. Hiding in the corner.
Morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm here to ask for acceptance for a bid award for annual road striping with signature authority to the roadmaster. We received 2 bids this year. Apply Line came in low bid at $84,000 to restripe all our roads in Curry County roads. And the city of Brookings piggybacks on top of this and has their roads striped as well, and they pay for that themselves. And so I'm just looking to get approval to award this contract to Apply Line.
So I just have one question. Do we get any kind of administrative fee from the city of Brookings for arranging all of this?
No.
Okay.
I think originally they did 6 years ago, and actually back then I was the public works supervisor, and I reached out to Dan Crumley if he would allow us to piggyback then on the county, and I think we paid GIS tech Rob Schaefer to do the map and plan it all out, and we did all that. Now it's just every year it's the same project going out, and we just piggyback onto the county contract.
Okay, I just wondered whether there was a lot of time involved with you having to arrange.
Zero at this point.
Okay. So do we have a motion to approve Richard Christensen to take care of the paint striping project?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Second the motion.
Any further discussion? Call for the question?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, next. Year extension of current service with Axon Enterprise for body camera. Sheriff Ward.
Morning, Commissioner. Sheriff Ward. I've listened to an accident up there in Port Orford, so we're doing a 1-year extension on this agreement, and it's pretty self-explanatory for the Exxon body cameras, and I think the cost did come up just a little bit based on the annual cost. So what you have in front of you is the contract.
So I just have one question. Are there other entities that do this same service, or no?
Well, it's not so much that there isn't, that there are, but we already have their equipment. If we have to go through their equipment, we'd have to buy all new equipment, and
Okay,
most of this
gotcha.
is storage for all the evidence storage.
Yeah, I'm just looking for a way to get some competition if possible, but I understand what you're saying. And body cameras, I would say, are really important. I've seen some instances where police would have been liable for things had they not had those body cameras. So,
Well, what we try to do is manage our liability, and we get accused of things that we
that's
didn't
what I'm
do,
saying. Yeah, exactly what I'm saying. Okay, so do we have a motion to approve the 1-year extension of the current service with Axon Enterprise for body cameras?
I'll move, Madam Chair.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Commissioner
Sheriff,
Huxley?
it's for about $6,400 in the, is this budgeted for the next fiscal year? Is that what this is?
Yes.
And it is budgeted as a
Yes.
line item? Okay. Was it budgeted as a separate line item for this, or
Under professional services.
just professional services? Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Call for the question.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, next, Sheriff is still up. Order and master agreement for updated records management system.
Joel, anyone handle that one? I guess that one's here.
Morning, Commissioners, Madam Chair. Sergeant Joel Hensley, Curry County Sheriff's Office. I'm Dispatch Supervisor, Jail Commander. This last year, we were approached by CMI, who's been our records management company, jail management, inmate management system, CAD system. It's pretty much our main software database. They were bought out by another company, and as part of that, there was a new rate structure, which is an increase, and an actual formal contract. We entered into the CMI system back in 2003, I believe. Back then it was a sole source, and I believe it was just done under invoicing, so that we really never had a true contract. Just they'd provide a service, that we'd get billed, and we would pay accordingly. So with this new system, we have met with our other partners that we dispatch for. We've deferred some of these costs to them. Some of the costs we did have to increase, like for the jail management system. But all these have been budgeted. We included all these in our professional services. I believe during budget hearing, somebody asked why the increase in professional services in a couple divisions. This is to reflect these costs. In the time I was provided, I did look at some other options. However, the initial startup cost for those options, one was $210,000, another one was about $170,000, and that's just the Curry County Sheriff's Office cost. Some could have been deferred over a couple of years, but we didn't see that money available. That would still be about $80,000 a year. So right now we're going to continue to keep our eyes open for any other competition, see what else is out there. However, this will be a 3-year contract. That is the smallest amount we could do. There's some other options that might be out there, but they haven't manifested. Coos County is going to an option that they haven't seen the entire product, even though they're going to it in a couple weeks. So we're going to watch and see what happens. If it's a better option for us, we'll definitely explore those opportunities when they come. Due to the cost, it would probably have to be through an RFP process, though. So that's pretty time intensive. So this right here, our system does work. It works well for us. It works well for Curry County. Same system that Brookings used. However, the costs are split because we're still 2 different centers, but we could still join all the data together later.
Okay. Any questions? You answered most of the questions. You anticipated all the questions, I can tell.
You
Yes, sir.
mentioned 3-year, and that's at about $21,000 per year.
With
correct?
between a 3 to 5% raise every year.
Okay, so but the first year is 20,
That is a first year rate. That
and
is
then the
what-
next year will be a little bit more than, so 21 plus thousand per year.
Correct. And those are split between the divisions, whether it be dispatch, jail, and some of the costs for the dispatch we did split up with the other agencies that we dispatch for when it comes to record management, because they use our system for records management as well.
Okay. So does anybody have any further questions? So could I get a motion to okay the master agreement for updated records management
signature
system?
authority. Can we get signature authority? That's what Sheriff asked me to ask.
Oh, okay.
So can we get signature authority to sign this contract?
You want that added to that?
With signature authority.
Oh, with signature
Yes.
authority. Okay, so do I have that motion?
Carol, a motion to approve the order of master agreement for updated records management with signature authority to Sheriff Ward.
Do we have a second?
Second, Madam Chair.
Any discussion? Call for the question.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and we've got another presentation by Sheriff Ward, replacement of video surveillance system cameras.
So what this is we had some extra money coming in this last year with the contract for parole and probation out of Coos County, and we wanted to make sure we do some upgrading in our jail facilities as far as video and audio. It also helps with managing our huge liability there and officer safety. So we've went out with and asked for different contracts or different proposals from several different places, and found that this one that we liked with the total of costs of about $92,000, and we're asking for again signature authority to enter into this contract to replace and upgrade all our video and audio system.
So I have a question. Would this maybe help with the number of people that have to work with your employment, or cut down on the time, or anything like that? Or?
It's all it's going to do is, like I say, it's like wearing our body cams. We have to have some protection and liability management with all the camera systems we're going to be installing. We're going to also install some around the building that will, keep track of anything going on outside. it's good for the security of our jail as well.
Okay. Any other questions of Sheriff Ward? Commissioner Huxley?
You mentioned that this revenue or this funding was coming from a particular source. Now, I know we've talked about that in the budget hearings or the budget meetings. Does there need, this purchase is for the coming fiscal year?
It's going to be out of this fiscal year, and we're doing a supplemental budget to show that.
So there still needs to be a supplemental budget done then on this subject or this topic.
Louise Kallstrom, County Accountant. We are going to put that on the June 6th meeting. I just wanted to make sure before we put it on as a supplemental budget that this was approved.
So do we have a motion to approve the replacement of the video surveillance system with signature authority to Sheriff Ward?
Yes.
Chair, I'll motion to approve item 5E, replacement of video surveillance system, as submitted with signature authority to Sheriff Ward.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? Call for the question?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
You're ready for your new cameras?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
we have Frank Burris. Did you need to address the board, or
Yeah,
we took care of your business?
we
Yeah.
took, you were
Consent calendar
handed on
stuff.
consent calendar, so, yep.
You can hang
Thought you
out if
probably
you
knew
want.
that, but I
You
didn't
might want to
know.
get copies of the orders after they sign them, but that probably won't be till lunchtime. We can just send them your way.
I don't know, we're moving pretty quick
I
here
agree.
today.
That's all I have.
We've already finished a page of it. There's only 2 pages. Yay. Okay, we're going to move past the public hearing part because that happens at 1:30 today. Let's look in old business. That would be, yes.
So
Commissioner Huxley.
back to the conversation on the public hearing and the amended, are we going to have any discussion on the Parks Department now?
Yeah, we just went over that. 7B.
That's 7B. Does that have to be in the public hearing, Councilor?
The public hearing can happen anytime. Carolyn Johnson designated her public hearing at 1:30, so we have to have that at 1:30. But you could open a public hearing basically on the parks ordinance right now if you wanted to.
Did that have to be in the newspaper as a public, listed as a public hearing and all of that?
It was published with our agenda as being a public hearing. It's not required to have the newspaper notice. And this goes back to Director Johnson's dealing with the Oregon land use laws and how to amend land use laws, and that requires newspaper notice by statute. To hold a public hearing doesn't require anything other than our notification
So
that
the
we give on our
agenda's
meetings.
enough?
Yes.
Okay. So,
In a non-land use context.
Commissioner Huxley?
On the, so we could have it at
Correct.
this time.
Let's do it right now.
But I'm a little, confused because it came back as an ordinance. And in the brief background, it says direction was given to finalize and bring back an ordinance. Not that I was aware of. You know, towards the end of the discussion on the prior meeting, there was reference, early on, county council just referenced the order, there was an order, a draft order in the original, the packet some weeks back that we had discussion on. And all of a sudden, it's gone to an ordinance, and I don't know why.
Thank you. It's mainly a protocol. I mean, do we want to, I think if we start the public hearing, we can talk about why it's an ordinance in a staff presentation and then go to the public hearing. But essentially, the Parks and Recreation Commission, we have in our codified ordinances a section dedicated to parks. And then this is creating a body, and most other places have these in their ordinances. And then we have created a different commission, the Planning Commission, as we'll see there, and that's under land use. But we're just trying to make it have a similar protocol. So we're having it be an ordinance in the codified ordinances It delegates some referral power to the Parks Commission, but it's really in the ordinances for kind of protocol and consistency's sake. Gives a committee, I suppose, a little more strength in its creation created by an ordinance versus an order. Ordinances have 2 readings. They're really very they have more substance than just orders. So what I understood the direction was, you were presented with an order and the board said, can you take a look at this at the legal department and bring us back something for the next meeting? So when I looked at it from the legal department's point of view and compared it to other county and city parks commissions, those commissions were created by ordinances and those other organizations, and we have at least one other commission created by ordinance. We have actually a couple. We have some hearing boards. We have a few other things created by ordinance here. So it was my analysis that an ordinance would be the appropriate mechanism to create this board.
So, Commissioner Huxley, and then I have a question.
Then, in this also, because we're exercising the emergency clause because we're saying it's an emergency, otherwise you'd have to wait. Typically, what the hope is, not on every ordinance, but so we're declaring an emergency, which is required to pass an ordinance if you don't wait for 90 days to allow the citizens' right of referendum. Is that a fair question?
Correct. It's basically invoking the emergency clause, and that was also borrowed from prior ordinances of the county. That's at the option of the board, and that goes to when the effective date would be. So if you decline to adopt to declare an emergency after the second reading, it would be effective, I think, 90 days or something after that. So it would change the effective date. So when you look on the draft, it talks about when the first reading, second reading, and effective date of that, and that's found on page 93. So if you adopt this and strike the emergency clause, then it would have a first reading and a second reading, and again, it will come back as an ordinance. It would come back for a second reading if the board directs it to be brought back with a different effective date.
So the only other question I have, we're looking at an ordinance versus a policy to put this committee together. All committees that are formed, if they're ongoing, do they require an ordinance? That's just kind of a generic question.
And the generic answer would be no. It just goes to the formal process for creating them, and then perhaps also amending or changing them. So once you're in an ordinance, it's more process to create, more process to change. So it's more of a statement that it's something that's really desired and to be established. And again, it was my analysis. It wasn't any real direction from the board to bring it back as an ordinance. Perhaps it was I don't know how, a misstatement, but it was direction to legal counsel to look at it and bring something back for adoption. So when I looked at it and brought something back for adoption, my analysis was that ordinance would be the appropriate mechanism.
Commissioner Boyce?
Madam Chair, did I hear you say we could approve this as long as we revoke the emergency clause?
Oh, I didn't say that. I was just
Maybe I did misunderstand.
Yeah.
But I would think that is the wise direction to go here. Just simply, the ordinance is fine, but or you should have said it. I think we just invoked it.
Sure, if I could.
Emergency.
Does the board want to start the public hearing on this now, move on to other items, and do this after the public hearing? or should we just get started? We've had a decent amount of discussion on this, and it's just a question of, do we want to just hear the whole staff report and have these questions and then go from there?
Might as
Yeah.
well ask if there is somebody who wants to comment.
So open it up.
Okay, would anybody like to comment on this?
If I could, I'll do a staff report. And
Okay,
then,
staff report and then the public hearing?
Yep.
Is that what you're talking about?
Sure.
Good. That would be, Director Trost would do the staff report? Yes, no?
Yes.
I can get it started, and I think Jay can fill in. Jay did the presentation, if I'm not mistaken, at the last meeting,
Yes, he did.
where he presented basically the desires or the good reasons for having a Parks Recreation Advisory Committee. So this is an advisory committee, and they would advise the Board of Commissioners and other bodies, including the Planning Commission. And if you look around other places, one of the main documents that is created with the assistance of a Parks and Recreation Committee is a Parks Master Plan, and usually the Parks and Recreation group starts it out, and then they work in coordination with a Planning Commission and staff, and then that gets brought to the Board of Commissioners for adoption. So this just says this will be an ordinance creating that so if you look, it says it's amending Curry County Code Article 5 Parks. So our Curry County Code already has a codified article in our ordinances called Parks, and so I felt that it also, for that reason, made sense in our own ordinances scheme to have this included in there as well. And it would just be Article or Division 2 of that article, and called a Parks and Rec Advisory Committee. And then we have the adoption, severance clause, and emergency clause, which is your standard language. And then this is on page 93. And then we go into this. Then you create it. You establish the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee, and it's called the committee. It has powers and duties, and it talks about what the powers and duties are. It acts as a referral agency to the Curry County Board of Commissioners, other county boards, commissions, and committees, and county administration and departments with respect to all matters pertaining to parks properties and recreation activities. And then it says the duties include, but are not limited to, the study and recommendation. So they don't really have a final deciding authority on things. And it talks about present and future overall park needs, short-term, long-range planning for parks needs and uses, identifying, prioritizing acquisition, development, decommissioning of parks and recreation programs, inventorying, categorizing classes of county parks to evaluate level of service. It's common if you look at some parks master plans, they look at where your population is, where the locations of the parks are, what portion of the population is being served by parks, and then is a portion being underserved. And you get into what level of service do you want for your parks. Advised during the creation, revision, amendment of the County Parks Master Plan as a segment of the County Comprehensive Plan. So once again, they would develop a report for the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission would review it. And there would likely be a joint presentation to the Board of Commissioners as a Parks Master Plan, as an element of the Comprehensive Plan. Review and advise on operational and maintenance policies and parks use rules to ensure success in county parks. So this is where they would be working with Jay Trost and his staff when he says we have this park, we have this problem, this is a rule. They'd look at those, give him advice. Ultimately, the rules would be adopted at the administrative or the board level. Then consider financial needs and resources, including fees for services. So they would be a sounding board for, again, staff on what's appropriate fees for the parks. Hold hearings and take public comment on any matter under consideration. What these committees do is they essentially do a lot of the ground level work to assist the board and staff on these items. And then enlist assistance and cooperation from other non-governmental entities, nonprofits, for accomplishing the county parks, and then other duties and powers. So those would be their powers. Very standard. Some of those were included in the order that was presented to you by Jay Trost at the last meeting or at the workshop. And then I, again, per what I considered my instructions was to take a look at it and bring you back something. I looked at other parks and recreation commissions at other government entities and, you know, took some of their suggestions for those powers and duties. This is very similar to, the meetings part is very similar to what was presented. You know, they'll have public meetings subject to the Oregon Public Meetings Law. They have their power to establish their own meeting date and time, but until that time, it would be Wednesday, first Wednesday of every other month. So they meet 6 times a year as needed, 5 p.m. It says additional meetings may be convened as long as they comply with public meetings laws. This was the number of, this was taken the number of members, no fewer than 3, no more than 7. At least 1 shall be from each geographic region of the county. The North region, and this is something that, again, I looked at, I took it upon myself to come up with these regions. I think they're somewhat borrowed from other regions of describing the county, but the Coos border south to Sisters Rock, and then Central region from Sisters Rock to Burnt Hill Creek, which is right by Myers Beach, I think, and then the South region from Burnt Hill Creek to the California border, which covers, I'm pretty sure, like Cape
Well, that's the
Ferrella.
same as the planning commission, it
Very,
sounds like.
it's similar, right? It's similar to have, so then, and then it's desired that 1 member be a student at a high school, community college, or equivalent in the county during at least 1 year. So there's a statement here, and again, this is new for the board to think about, but this was taken, I borrowed it from a place I came from. They had a student member at the Parks Commission. They also had a complete youth advisory committee where the whole committee was run by the Parks Department of youth members of the community to advise the Board of Commissioners on youth issues. But this is just a small slice of that to recommend, because I think a lot of the population that's served by the Parks Department is youth. So let's hear from them, give them a voice. So that was the idea there. Again, this is all for the board to agree to or not. And then it's 4-year terms. This paragraph is trying to establish staggering of terms so that, you know, you have, if you appoint everyone at one time, you still stagger the terms of those initial appointments so that they don't all expire at once. And then they expire December 31st, so appointments would be in late year to start in January, similar to election type time periods. And then all members will serve without compensation, and they can meet in attendance by electronic or telephonic. And then this last part establishes that the Parks Department administers the activities of the committee. Staff shall serve as administrative office to the committee. Parks and Rec staff shall prepare committee agenda reports, publish notice, and record all minutes of the meetings. That definitely puts the onus on the Parks Department to essentially do all of the administrative work for this committee and commission. And they're responsible for updating the Board of Commissioners. Then this park staff has to update the BOC office with status of committee membership. That seems to be a issue with some of our boards and committees. The other thing, again, reason I suppose for putting it in ordinances, some of the committees and commissions that have been created by orders just kind of fall by the wayside, and so trying to keep it so that this committee is, again, a committee that won't happen too. And also a lot of those other committees and commissions that were created by orders, I don't think had a particular department to staff them. The parallel would be the Planning Commission, which is staffed by the Development Department. And these guys wouldn't necessarily be a subset of the Planning Commission, but they would assist the Planning Commission on a particular item of study that they would hopefully generate expertise in and be focused on to assist them. So really that's the report, unless there's any questions, and if you want to suggest changes or anything like that.
Did anybody have any questions? The only change I would suggest is getting rid of the emergency clause.
Okay. And then if you want to
Other
open,
than that, I'm fine with
if you
it.
want to open the public hearing.
This public hearing is now open.
We're going to hear from Director Trost first.
If
Oh,
he wants to
sorry.
be part of
Yeah.
that, Director Trost, did you want to?
Thank you.
Your 2 cents?
I actually looked for him, but I couldn't see him back there.
That's because Mr. Burris was in the way.
Good afternoon. Jay Trost, Parks and Juvenile Director. Yeah, obviously we're in full support. This is a fantastic direction. I really appreciate the work that Council Huddle put into this to, tidy the edges, make sure everything's good, and something that'll stand for a long period of time, help serve our parks.
Before publication, I did run the changes by the Parks and Recreation Director, and he was in support of it, and he was also favorably impressed with the idea of a youth member. So, because it also dovetails into the other component of your job as the juvenile director. So, again.
And I also agree with that. I know on the school board we have a youth come and be part of that. Doesn't vote, but at least gets a say in what goes on, and I think that's important. Do we have any other public comment or questions of Mr. Trost? Okay, Connie Hunter?
Thank you. I'm Connie Hunter. I live in South Curry County, and I want you to listen long and hard to what Director Trost advises here. First of all, he doesn't take a step without knowing it's the right thing to do. He's just that good of a planner. In addition to that, he made it a point to sit on the Brookings Parks and Recreation Committee as well, their commission as well. So he's learned about how the commissions work at the local level for Parks and Rec. I think it's a fantastic opportunity for more people to give input and support the efforts of Parks and Recs and events and work that they do, for example, at Lobster Creek. And I am in full 100% support of this opportunity, and for Director Trost to be respected in his capabilities and his dignity in his work. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other public comment? Hearing none. Did you have another comment?
No. Did you have any questions for me?
Any further questions? I don't have any. It was pretty well spelled out. Do we have a motion to approve this ordinance for the first reading with the exception of the emergency clause?
It gives me great joy to make that motion.
I don't
Madam
see
Chair.
a smile on your face. Okay, good. Do we have a second?
It really does.
Well, I mean, joyful people smile, right? I'm sorry, I couldn't resist.
I'm glad you didn't. I'll second that joyful motion.
Are you smiling too?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Do we have any further discussion? Hearing no further discussion, I call for the question.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, this will be brought back for a second reading.
Good, thank you. Yes, question? Commissioner?
Can it be brought back in a week, or I know there's a minimum time, or is it a little longer than that?
I'll take a look. I think in the statutes, I think it says it's read at least once in 2 meetings, and I'm not sure if it says that they have to be 2 weeks apart or not. It's very common to require 2 weeks, but
I thought there was something, I just wasn't sure
it is.
what it was.
It's in the reason why we have 2 readings on an ordinance is because it is by the statutes of general law counties on way to adopt ordinances.
Okay, moving on, old business. We've got the Perkins Head Start Project Architect Agreement. David Barnes wanted to speak to that first, so then we'll have him come forward.
Hi, David Barnes again. I was just curious, what was the status, whatever happened with the old architect? I remember hearing a few months ago that there was possible litigation or something over his termination for taking the project too far. And I was wondering if that was something that you were able to share with me, or whether that's something that's still in executive session.
Well, nothing's changed from how you described it.
Okay. So we have not resolved with him yet, in other words.
We feel like we have resolved with him, but he might have a different opinion, and
Okay.
So,
All right. If the time comes, I looked through the information that was included in the package, and I saw the original architect's presentation of what the building would be, and what it stands as now, and the paperwork, the AIAs, what was there of it. And it seems to me that he went way overboard. This is my opinion of it without having studied it. I'm an internal auditor by trade. I've done building audit and construction audit for many years, building projects up to $50-60 million, down from all the way from minor repair work in stores and shop facilities, so I know a little bit about it. When the time comes, if we're getting sued, I offer my services and will gladly review the paperwork and offer opinion on where we stand on it. It appears, like I said, though, it appears to me that he went way over the scope of the original contract which he was offered, expanded the building by almost twice in size by the looks of it. So we would have a leg to stand on in defense against that, I believe, as an auditor. So I just wanted to...
Okay, we appreciate your concern and offer to help. Commissioner Huxley?
County Council, you mentioned in response to the question, it's pretty much as it still was, but could you just give us some close estimates as far as how much the original work in dollars was spent, how much the county feels was...
Well, okay, I will give a little background, because what we're here to consider is a contract for a replacement architect, and I'll give a little background of why we do have a replacement architect. And in the materials is the replacement architect contract, and as an exhibit to that, now Mr. Barnes mentions an original architect. Technically what you have as our first exhibit is something from Scott Edwards Architect. So Scott Edwards Architect was the architect on the grant application. When we first went to CDBG, HUD, State of Oregon, and we came to them with a project and a budget. Based on Scott Edwards Architect materials, we came up with an original budget, and you can see it in there. Total project estimated cost is on page 105. It says $1,852,000 project estimate. And that was a grant application support. And we got awarded, I think, $1,600,000. Of that, I want to say roughly 120 or 118 was an architect budget line item for architect work, I think.
I think it was 120.
120, something along those lines. So then what we did is we went out to bid for an architect, and this is the one that Mr. Barnes is talking about. And we had a contract with an architect called Lon Samuels. And Lon Samuels was paid for roughly $90,000 of that $120,000 architect budget. And after about 2 years, we really had not gone anywhere on this project. And we needed to go forward. There needed to be amendments made. There was non-amendments, so we needed to, cut ties with Mr. Samuels. We did. And then we needed to, you've been through the whole background on this. We studied whether we should go forward or not. We examined the building. We got involved with ORCA, and that's another part of this. And we talked to the IFA. So essentially we have roughly, I think, $30,000 plus or minus in our architect budget that didn't get spent. A new architect will come on board if we approve this contract. His name is Stuart Woods out of Coos Bay. He's agreed, per our contract, to not exceed $80,000 on his architect work on this project. That's our agreement with him. The next agreement that you'll see, yes, Commissioner Boyce.
Excuse me, if I may, page 2 of the agreement, item 3, it says not to exceed 85. Is there
85, thank you, okay.
It's not a big deal, but it might be, actually.
It's 85. I'm speaking extemporaneously here without my notes, and I'll just...
So we can just change that on our agenda routing to 85, right? Is that...
The agreement is what you'd be approving, not the agenda routing slip. So
Gotcha,
what the
thank you.
agreement says is it. If I was,
No big deal.
and I must say that this agenda, I apologize, was prepared in haste between budget meetings, and I had several items, but if I could just continue a little bit, I appreciate your attention
clarified.
to detail there, Commissioner Boyce.
Thank you.
So Stuart Woods is the potential replacement architect. What he's also done, the other exhibits you'll see in there, again, this grant was awarded 3 or 4 years ago, and what this fella says is, well, I could come in at the architect, but he has proposed a new budget for the project as well as a new timeline for completion. His timeline for completion is August 2019. So he's saying, and that's and an architect is on a project. As you can see, the Scott Edwards was involved before we even applied for a grant. Stuart Woods needs to do some work on this project to develop proposals for the state, for amending the contract with the state. So the idea is we would contract with Stuart Woods now. The next agreement, so not to exceed 85. The next agreement, as you'll see in the packet, is a contribution agreement with Orca, which is the fellow Mike Lehman, who's been here a time or two to talk to you all. And if you remember, they submitted some confidential financial documents that, my impression was the board was satisfied with their financial wherewithal, that they could, before getting into a contribution agreement, we wanted to see, could they put their money where their mouth is. So what the contribution agreement from Orca says, it's the next agreement that goes parallel with this architect agreement, and I please don't want you to enter the architect agreement if without entering the contribution agreement from Orca.
Yeah.
But what it says is Orca will pay the first, I think, $30,000 towards the architect, then we will pay the middle $39,000 or whatever it is left on our line item budget, and then Orca will pay whatever is not paid after that. The contribution agreement from Orca references a separate agreement with Orca that we already have pre-existing. It's called a co-ownership agreement. And that was an agreement that was also entered with Orca at the very beginning of the contract, of the grant agreement, where it said Orca will pay any costs that aren't covered by the grant. And we've talked to Orca about, let's say, for instance, this thing with Lon Samuels goes, not in our favor. We may go back to Orca and say, by the way, that could be a cost not covered by the grant, and hi, Orca, here's your agreement. So that's all. I don't want you to get too sidetracked with any of the Lon Samuels business or the Orca business, but these two agreements here are to move the project forward. If you recall, we did a lot of study on this. We did an inspection. We had an appraisal, and we also have, later on in the package, a commitment from SWAC to sell the building and to contribute an amount towards it. So all of these items then, and there's also a memo later on under manager report that talks about the next steps that are need to be taken. It lists about 5 or 6 of them. We have the environmental, then the purchase, and then we should have construction drawings and bid and construction. And so those are some of the big picture. And by the way, we also need an amendment to our agreement with the state folks, the Infrastructure Finance Authority, also called BizOrg. They've come down and addressed you. They have said that they will extend the time. And the one thing we're looking at doing is possibly, if you saw the budget, it had, roughly $1 million for construction. There was $100,000 for architect. There was like $90,000 in contingency. There's a few other items, and what we're talking to them about, based on Stuart Woods' materials, is possibly changing some of the line items as well to allow us to complete construction and make sure things get covered where there might have been, I don't want to call it, there just might have been extra money in perhaps a line item. Some people call it trim the fat, metaphorically. But anyway, that we can perhaps take some money out of a line item that might, on second thought, have had too much and put it to another line item where we need it. So that's what's happening. And that item will be coming back to the board, which will be, again, an amendment with the IFA to extend and modify the budget and those kind of things. So, but for now, it's just to get a replacement architect on board. We have money in the budget for it. The next item is where there's not money in the budget. We have an agreement from Orca to pay whatever's not covered in the budget on the architect.
So question, have
Yes.
they agreed to pay just on the architect portion, anything that's not covered in the budget?
Thank you. So that's part of in the agreement with Orca in here. There's a doctrine in the law called pre-existing duty. So they already had an agreement with us to pay for anything not covered. And so what I've said is, to the extent, this would just be a subcategory of that. This would just say, okay, you promised to pay anything not covered. This is executing that promise here, and it's giving the details of how you would pay something not
So
covered.
is it part of the promise, is my
Yes.
point?
If I could, if you look on page 131 and 132 of the agenda packet, it goes into it, and it says, basically at the bottom it says, Orca could be required to make additional contributions under the co-ownership agreement. That's on the very top of page 132. And
Okay.
the bottom it says, if this is inconsistent with the co-ownership agreement, this is a new deal, and it also says the county can't get double paid. But it says, to the extent this is not inconsistent with the co-ownership agreement, this is just a specified activity under that co-ownership agreement. So what we didn't want to do was have this supersede or replace that or mess up the co-ownership agreement in any way. We wanted to coordinate this agreement with the co-ownership agreement, and then just basically say Orca could be required to make additional contributions under the co-ownership.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're covered.
I tried to do that for you. That's the language I use. You have a question on your left.
I
Commissioner
realize
Huxley.
that county council, you don't want to get bogged down with the old architect, and numbers, but.
Talking Long
my-
Samuels? Or?
Correct, the
Okay.
original.
All right.
My recollection was it was significantly more than 120,000 because
Oh,
they said, heck, we'll submit our own contract and you just sign it, which the county
so right,
rightfully did.
right. So
it was significantly over 120.
I think in fact your reminder is that the line item in the budget was like 120, but our award of the contract
Was
to the architect
significantly-
was like 130 or more, 140.
140
right.
or something.
And so yeah, that was
And that my recollection also was in discussions with Orca at one point that they were going to assume the costs for the replacement architect. They weren't going to, the county wasn't going to come in and pick up $39 or whatever $1,000 either.
we are paying the replacement architect, and you say the county, it's coming out of the grant.
Well, true, but the county as the, administrator, if you will,
Well-
that all the costs were to be in, discussions at one point for it to continue with another architect that was Orca's choice, was to be at Orca's cost. So
That's really interesting, because I was involved in all those discussions. That's not how I remembered it. I remembered that we had talked about it in this fashion, that what was ever not left in the budget, because we still have unspent money in the architect line item on the budget. So we were,
maybe that gets back to, do we
Yeah.
recognize that there could be litigation too? Okay.
yep.
And then there's also, Commissioner Boyce mentioned at one area there was 85,000, but there's also in the agreement, there's another section where it's 80,000.
Oh boy.
We need to,
So page
we'll flip a
134.
coin. Well, heads it's 80, tails it's 85.
Well, let me just take a look here.
Go to
134.
page, in the whereas, page 129.
That's for
Whereas
the
this agreement will not
architect.
exceed 80,000.
Okay, so we're on page 129
120.
in the packet.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I am wrong on that. It is 129.
Okay, so that is the order, and that's a whereas it will not exceed 80, and that's where I,
But there was an area too that said 85. I don't remember
Correct.
what
I
page
think
was,
the
but that's
85 is in the
what
contract.
Commissioner Boyce mentioned.
yep, I think 80.
In the
and-
agreement, yes.
Yeah, 85 is in the agreement, but let me take a look at that, please.
While you're doing that, Madam Chair, do we have basically two orders, separate orders we need to approve here? One with the,
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, ultimately, sure.
and where are we with SWAC? Do you need action on that?
No, SWAC
I didn't
currently is
see
just
that.
SWAC currently is just further down in the packet is just a explanation.
Okay.
Do you know where the 85 was?
I think I do, and
It was early on.
if you take a look at page 118 and 119 in your packet. So this is the letter from Mr. Woods written on March 2nd, and this says 10/17, but it was 2017. This was when we first had him come on and we were looking. And at the top, and this is his letter to Mike Lehman, at the top of page 2, it says
Yep,
the
I see
contract
the
will not
85.
exceed 85. And then that's his exhibit. Now then we have an actual contract document several pages forward of that, which is on page 96 and 7. And that says not to exceed 85,000 is on page 97, sub 3, payment. So again, I apologize, the parts that were incorrect was the AGRS and the orders, but really the contract is correct with the 85,000 based on, and then the rest is up to, and again, I'm nearly positive, and I apologize, that I typed the AGRS and the orders up from memory, which is faulty.
So then it is 85.
Yes, that's what the agreement says, and that's what
Okay.
that was my representation to Commissioner Boyce when he says the agreement says 85 and the AGRS and the orders say 80, and I said we'd be bound by the agreement, not the orders of the AGRS. And if you like, we can amend the orders to accurately reflect it, and I apologize for the AGRS. I don't think it makes much sense to change an AGRS, but I do think it makes sense to change an order. If
Oh, yeah,
ordered.
definitely.
So we can do that.
Just did.
Well, it would be as amended to reflect that, but
Okay.
but that's the long and the short of the architect contract, unless there's any questions.
Okay, so we've got 2 orders here.
Well, we
Correct.
just take them one at a time. The first one is found on
Page 129. Madam Chair, I'll make a motion to approve the agreement with Stuart Woods as replacement architect for Brookings Head Start project.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
and then if I could be on 129, it says
With the
agreement
amendment,
will-
excuse
Thank
me.
you. So
Yes.
the line would say not to exceed 85. So
Okay,
thank you very much.
thank you, good job.
Okay, any further discussion? Call for the question?
Aye.
Aye.
I abstain from voting.
Okay, and then the second order, where is that?
The second
131.
second one, and that's the as described. And again, apologize for the extemporaneous 80,000 instead of 85.
134.
Right, I got that.
So, Madam Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve the agreement with Oregon Coast Community Action for its contribution to the cost of replacement of the architect on the Brookings Head Start project.
And
Second.
it needs to be amended to 85,000?
Yep. Thank you.
No, now,
This one too.
that's not in any, this
Well-
is,
Yeah, it is. It's on page
on the
134
whereas.
on the whereas. Thank you. Yes.
excuse me, it is.
It's okay.
It
I'll check.
reflects the other
Yep.
order we just voted on. Okay.
Okay, so do we have a second on that?
Second.
Any further discussion? Call for the question?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll abstain.
Okay. Okay, moving on. Brookings Airport transfer ownership?
Here's a big one.
Well, I suppose it's a big one. We've had a lot of discussion on this. And really, what this agreement does, it does more or less three things. It transfers the property and the assets. It transfers the sponsorship. It's kind of like a license under the FAA. And then it also transfers grant responsibilities to Brookings. And the price is roughly $123, $171. That's a pretty good estimate. We are near the completion of any outstanding grants. The only outstanding grant is this Air GIS Aegis portion of the fence grant. I'm nearly positive the board is pretty familiar with the ins and outs of this agreement. A lot of it is, legalese, but basically we entered the agreement today. There was also, we entered the agreement today, we give ourselves until closing of June 27th, which is the last Wednesday in June, and for some reason I'm anticipating a possible board meeting that day, even though there's nothing scheduled right now. But we plan on closing at that time. And by that time, if you look in here, there's a real property description on Exhibit A. We're getting that. Those are the lots and tax lots. It's not a meets and bounds. We're getting a more or less starting at this point and continuing along this line to this point, and then taking this many degree turn. And so we're looking at a meets and bounds. There's also a right of first refusal under our acquisition of the airport improvements from the Oregon Department of Aviation. They had the right of first refusal. If we were going to transfer this, they could say, no, we want it. But we have that in here as well. If you look on page 147, it has a list of grants applicable to BOC. There's roughly 3-ish outstanding. This is what we have the escrow for. The idea is to transfer all of our outstanding grants and grant obligations, because what happens is when you get a grant and you do an improvement like a fence, you then in that grant commit to maintaining that improvement for a period of roughly 20 years. And so that maintenance obligation and all the grant obligations would be transferred to the city. They're aware of these things. I also attended the City of Brookings meeting last night. They had a city council meeting last night, and their board, their city council approved the transfer agreement and the agreement to pay us for the airport. So really, I think the board is, if there's any question as to why we're only receiving, for the record, $123 more or less $1,000, that represents our out-of-pocket, out-of-general fund contribution to the capital improvements for a period going back 6 years. And that 6-year look-back limitation is imposed on us by the Code of Federal Regulations and Federal Aviation Administration rules. Once you take a grant from them, you change your rights and responsibilities with respect to ownership of your property, and you limit what you can get from a transfer of this property. So that's really the long and the short of it. Unless there's any questions, I just request the board approve it.
Does anybody have any questions? Okay, so do we have a motion to approve the transfer of the Brookings the airport to City of Brookings?
Madam Chair, with bittersweet motion, recommendation to the board that we approve this agreement, transfer ownership of the Brookings Airport from Curry County to the City of Brookings, and I'm making that motion on the assumption we're just one order that you need us to approve here. Is that correct?
Thank you. And if I could, I believe I amended the order and I handed it out to you. This also would have, as needed, a signature authority for closing documents to County Council. That was submitted to you. It looks like this, and it's only because with these real estate transactions, the closing date is sometimes fixed, but sometimes it moves. And because the closing date's uncertain and it could be difficult to assemble commissioners on short notice, we authorize closing signature authority to county council as, you know, to just make it easier on everybody.
So, Madam Chair, I'd like to amend my motion and include that signature authority. We're not talking about the sheriff, though, is right?
No, Commissioner, it's only for this one item, and it's at your places. It's here.
Thank you.
Do we have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Any further discussion? Call for the question?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Next is the closing documents on Pine Street. Council Huddle?
Thank you. This was an addition to the agenda, and it's very similar. The board's aware. We've talked about the purchase and sale contract with the parties and the realtor, and it's getting time to sign paperwork again. As board directed, I entered into the purchase and sale agreement. The title company is looking for some documentation of signature authority, and so that's what this order is here. It's very similar to the change. In fact, once this came up on, this item actually came up first, and I said, well, I better do a similar thing on the Brookings Airport just to make it easier for the county to, you know, close these transactions out, just acting under board direction. So all this is it's mainly for the title company. Yes, so you have a question over there.
I'm just reading what is stapled together in these, and on the order transferring the Brookings Airport does have that as the subject of the agreement. The order for the Pine Street, I don't know what the other commissioners have, also has the airport.
Well, thank you very much.
So
By the end of the...
Mine just had Pine Street.
this is Pine Street.
Yeah.
What's yours say?
Here, this should have Pine Street on it, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
it says Pine Street.
Okay, mine doesn't. So, okay, so if you
Maybe
guys have
someone
Pine
just
Street.
stapled wrong.
Okay, that's fine.
You can have my copy,
Here, do you want this?
Commissioner Huxley, but that's interesting. So that's the idea. It's basically a delegation to, you know, you know the details and you know that. It's just we need someone to sign these documents when the time comes, and we don't want you guys to drive half hour to do that. So that's really what that order's about. If there's a motion to approve that, that'd be
Do we have a
appreciated.
motion to approve signature authority to John Huddle for the 438 Pine Street property or closing documents?
I would motion that.
Okay. Do we
Second,
have a
Madam Chair.
Any further discussion? Call for the question.
Aye?
Aye. And are we moving today? Okay, next, announcements. We've got Coos Curry Housing Authority, 2 vacancies with terms expiring January 3rd, 2021 and April 29th, 2022. Then June 6th is our next general meeting at 10 a.m. here. June 20th is a general meeting, 10 a.m. in the Commissioners' hearing room. June 27th is a possible end of the 2017-18 fiscal year meeting. July 4th, the county offices will be closed. July 18th is a general meeting, 10 a.m., Commissioners' hearing room. And
Question?
yes.
Thanks. If you have a minute, Madam Chair, you had a speaker here talk about the port, and if you saw also in the paper there was recalls.
Yep.
What I've heard from the clerk is that there's I guess a verification of election results period that takes about 2 weeks by statute. She thinks that's too long, but it's statute, she says. And there may be a need, if you remember when we just had to replace some commissioners, at least the minimum to obtain a quorum
Right.
for up north. We'll probably have to do that, and the timing of that may be at June 13th, which is one of our off weeks. It's like the second Wednesday in the month. It may be that we're asking for a special meeting. I'll keep you posted.
Okay.
If the port says, you know, we need you to appoint 1 or 2 folks so we
I'm
can get a
sure they
quorum.
need to get moving.
Yep, and by statute, they're restrained from doing that. According to the clerk, I haven't had time to look at it, but
Okay, well, I was going to contact Roy Davis and make
Okay.
sure that we get those applications of people who are interested in being port commissioners. So I'll do that this evening when I get home. Commissioner Boyce?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, according to the clerk, there's no way we can get around that 2-week period and do something on the 6th. If in fact we have applicants available and make a choice.
Well, as far as I know, I think she said the election was just last night, and there's some rules for elections on recalls that require verification. Again, this is all brand new information. I tell you what, if anything changes, we'll let you know on the 6th.
Thank you.
But for now,
But we're going to need those applications
yeah,
nonetheless.
it
so.
may work out good to give time enough to find some folks who are willing to do that.
Well, actually, I think they've got like
Okay.
over 10 applications.
But for
in.
now,
Really
June
help.
13th is the tentative earliest time we could do that. And if it changes, we'll definitely let you know.
Commissioner Huxley?
And there's several different statutes on the county appointing members of a commission for a port. It's confusing. It's really confusing. I'm not sure that I picked the right one yet. There's so many different ones that has to do how they were organized and not knowing.
And if I'm not
It's
mistaken,
very
with the
confusing.
other port, wasn't it a matter of resignations versus recalls? So
Right.
there was, I don't think we
That was
needed
the
a...
water district.
So, oh, thank you. I apologize. I don't think we needed the statutory
Yeah.
waiting period because it
Yeah.
wasn't a recall, it was just resignation.
But there weren't like 6 different
Yeah.
choices for a water district,
Yeah.
but there's like 6 different subsections.
So we got a little
depending
work cut
upon,
out for us.
But you know what?
Yeah.
2 of the port commissioners resigned, and we are going to be appointing 2.
That's interesting.
So I don't know whether there would be some sort of
Something we could do quicker.
Mhm.
We'll take a look. We'll take a look, but there's nothing we can do today.
Right.
Someone actually asked me when they read the paper if we were going to be appointing folks today, and
Well, we don't even have applications
no.
yet. so.
Again, what I've heard from the clerk, and until such time as it changes, the earliest would most likely be June 13th. But we'll take
Yeah,
a look.
I check on the resignation
Yep,
thing.
that's a
It's
good-
2 resigned, 2 were recalled.
That's
so.
a good point, and it
Commissioner
might.
Boyce?
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Go ahead. I'm done.
Just for my own education, I'm going to contact the Secretary of State's office and see if, as Commissioner Huxley pointed out, maybe there's a way to sort some of that out and be able to offer that back to you, and you can give it to the board. Quite the challenge.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, we're moving on. Interim County Administrator Oral Report. John Huddle.
Thank you. And at your places, you should have a draft, looks like this, of a federal coordination policy letter. I had John Jesuit work on this. We looked very closely at the work of Jackson County, who's been working on their federal coordination for some time. And so after looking at theirs, we took out some of their stuff as a little wordy, and we also used some of the original language in our original draft, and I'm not sure if that came from Commissioner Boyce or not. But really what we're being asked to be placed on their parties to provide notice when their agency considers, proposes, or taking action within the jurisdictional boundaries of our county. As a local government, we have interest in any and all actions. It's in addition to and not replace other notices we're entitled to receive under federal coordination requirements. I think like some of these federal land management acts require them to confer with us, but this is in addition to that. And then the notice requirement to the letter doesn't waive, release, or otherwise relinquish any rights we have as a participating, cooperating, consulting, or coordination. And sometimes we're listed as participating agencies, sometimes cooperating agencies in some of these federal acts. So again, and then we just say what we would like to include: policy development review comment, conferences, project notification, project review, project coordination. And that's it. It's just to, it's a kind of an introductory letter. It's trying to carry out the board's direction, and then there's a list of, this one is addressed as a draft to the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management. but there's several other federal agencies that we may want to write to, and perhaps some sub-agencies. Like, for instance, I think the Bureau of Land Management is under the Department of Interior, and the Forest Service is under Department of Ag, and so there's just different ones. I think we've got perhaps FEMA, Department of Homeland Security might be the lead agency for that. Commissioner Boyce has got a list that John Jesuit has prepared, and there's several, and then we would also send to elected officials in our area, and then also some state agencies, just to let them know. So the question would be, does the board want us to write, one letter? It goes to, we have there's multiple, dozens of federal and state agencies out there. Do you want us to prepare dozens of letters, each with an original signature for the 3 board members? I think that would be, in the first instance, most appropriate. And then afterwards, perhaps delegate some of the follow-up to administrator, or just, we would direct it to the chair or something. But for now, we're anticipating, one separate new letter to each of these agencies with 3 commissioner signatures on it. But it's really what you want to do there.
Commissioner Boyce?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for mentioning the state agencies. I think that is critical. I want to compliment you on your work with Jackson County. That was really a very wise approach in my view. I don't think we need a separate letter to each entity. I think we can address everyone and have just one letter. There's going to be changes, obviously. A regional supervisor, Jim Pena, is retired. There's a lot of action and movement going on within the Forest Service, for example, right now, and in fact the BLM too. So the letter you have, I think, is I wouldn't change anything, and in including that, I think that the sooner we do this, the better. Obviously, Madam Chair, this is going to have a 5-year expiration, I think, in August. Do I have that correct?
I would have to check.
But yeah, I might be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that's accurate. Anyway, that does get us through this fire season just in case, and then that would give us some time in the fall perhaps to update it if we inadvertently, unintentionally leave out any other agencies. But certainly I would want to include, just for example, not limited to the Oregon Department of Forestry. That would be number 1, Oregon Department of Fish and Game, etc. So I'm going to ask the board to work on getting this approved with the understanding that yes, it's going to, after August, because it is that 5-year, 2013 to 2018, we'll need to go spend some more time on this again.
So what you're
If I'm
referring to, bottom line, is we're just going forth with the ordinance that we promised we would update
Yeah, and because
every 5
we're
years.
Yes, and because we're elected officials, that basically says we have the authority to ask to be involved, but authority translated in this sense is more under the more under our responsibility. It's not necessarily saying we're going to take charge. Not at all. That's not how I've ever interpreted this, and just want to make that point, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Well, my impression was we wanted to be informed as well as included in discussions.
Yes,
on this letter.
And it's interesting because Council Huddle just reminded us that some agencies have a clear responsibility to immediately inform us. Others don't necessarily. It really depends on, as he said, whether it's the Department of Agriculture versus the Department of Interior. It is not an uncomplicated thing, which even puts more of a responsibility on us to kind of follow through and make sure this gets done. And reverting back to the 2013 Board of Commissioners, it just somehow inadvertently got overlooked, as you know. So,
Any other discussion on this issue? Okay, so it looks to me like Council Huddle is asking whether we want to write 13 letters or 1.
So
or
it sounded like perhaps if we have a generic address line on the inside.
yes.
So, not quite as bad as to whom it may concern, but something along those lines, and then have you sign one, and then we'll make copies, and then we'll have perhaps a staff cover letter to each entity, so that we have a cover letter to the right official, and then a signed copy letter from the board to whom it may concern about this letter. So
So,
that
Madam
way
Chair-
you only sign one document, and then we, at the staff level, address the letters accordingly.
So, Madam Chair, with that clarification, I'm going to make a motion that we take action on this today and approve the letter that was in our packet on the coordination policy, and of course, including all our congressional representative, our two senators, and our local state senator and state representative. Is that motion clear enough?
I don't know. Do we have a second?
I'll second, just to sign the document as presented.
Yep, and it won't be addressed to the BLM, though. It'll be more generic, and then we'll have a separate cover to each agency. But thank you. So no changes in the text.
Correct.
And sign one copy versus 10 and all that stuff. Good. Okay, that's clear.
Okay. So any further discussion? Call for the question.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we have exactly 15 minutes, which we have been allotted for commissioners' reports. Commissioner
Oh,
Huxley?
you have more things there, don't you?
Oh, golly gosh. Council
Eleven.
huddle, I think you have more stuff. I was
Let's
getting
take a
all
look.
excited here. I thought
That's
we were
okay.
gonna...
So the Brookies Head Start schedule memo and notarized offer. So if you recall, we had to, we made what's called a URA. We had a $370,000 appraisal on the Brookies Head Start property. We had to make an offer to SWAC in that amount, and you see where they have not accepted that offer. They've made a counter offer. They would contribute roughly $20,000 as a donation and agree to purchase it for $50,000. If that's the will of the board, we'll be bringing back a purchase and sale agreement. This is part of, if you recall, the memo on ahead of that talks about some of the steps to happen. And if you remember, I said we would move some budget item from areas that had perhaps more than anticipated. So for instance, in this case, what we're really anticipating is taking funds from the construction item, which is close to $1 million for the remodel, and moving it to acquisition. If you recall, our acquisition line item was roughly $313 or $315 on this property, and so we were quite a bit above that on the appraisal. I'll say, for lack of a better phrase, or just for expediency, that they agreed to more or less split the difference. Let's say we were $40,000 difference between acquisition and appraisal. We may have been more, but they agreed to contribute at least $20,000. We're going to try to add to the acquisition line item in an amendment with our IFA agreement on the grant to cover some of that. And then if anything we can't cover, ORCA would contribute per the co-ownership agreement, and that would all come back to the board when we take the next steps on acquisition. So that's, I really think within the next week or two, within the next meeting or two, we'll have the amendment with the IFA to change the budget line items to allow more funds for acquisition, and then to extend the time on the project. And that should really have this thing ready to proceed and be finalized by next August. So, and that's just a report. I'm not asking for any direction. We would bring something back to the board, but you do have some questions.
I know why you had it on oral report. I couldn't figure that out.
Not asking for direction on these two items.
Commissioner Huxley?
On this one, and again, you have the 80 back on this too. So we're... Again, it was a tough week, and I just was typing up things like crazy, and
I just wanted to see if we were on the ball.
No, I know you guys are on the ball, but I just, at least I was consistent. I always had it at 80.
It's probably just in your head. It's okay. Just as long as we're consistent when we get the
But
contract set up.
if I would have caught it once, it wouldn't have happened. And I did I don't want to say I got it right in the agreement, but the agreement is the accurate amount based on that. I just was I was trying to do a lot last week, and that's what happened. Apologize.
Did you want to report on the C&D also? Or?
Those are community development report and
Right, they were in
assessor,
the
or
packet.
excuse me, the surveyor report, and you're very familiar with those reports, and I don't have anything to add to them.
Okay, is everybody willing to go 5 minutes over, 5 after 12, to do the commissioner updates?
I have nothing to do.
Oh my gosh,
No,
I do have something. Do you have anything on
insults.
commissioner report?
Just a quick report, and this is a GIS update. And when we had the Board of Property Tax Appeals, there were 5 properties that were in question or had been appealed by the owners. Because of the way that the numbering system was created originally, some of those tax lot numbers have a space in between a dash and some don't. Sounds like no big deal, except when you're doing a search. And 2 of the 5 didn't come up. Well, I knew that they were there. I worked, coordinated with Lane County, and it was under 10 hours. I think we're hoping about 6. They couldn't remove the space because it would take the TSG, which is with the assessor, and turn the whole assessor thing upside down. So what they've done is we have drop-down menus now. Self-destructions are there, both the internal and the external site, so that you don't miss what could be 5 or 6 or 7,000 properties that are actually there, but because of a space, just a simple little space, a search didn't find them. That's my only comment. So,
I'll just give you a copy of what I'm going to read, and we'll get it in the record. Pass that on. I met with Mike Manning of BC Fisheries several weeks ago and was pleased to see that the facility is now employing 60 people at a living wage and is looking at expansion with the support of Brookings Harbor Board of Commissioners, which is unfortunately now in disarray, soon to be put back together. This is the only fish processing plant on the West Coast that meets high enough standards to sell to European countries. He has a long-term contract with several countries that would like to purchase all of his available product because of its high quality. He still holds back some of the product so that it can be sold locally. And I've been through that facility, pretty amazing. It's probably one of the best on the West Coast. I also met with the CTR committee and came away with the following information. China's import policy of accepting certain plastics is greatly affecting the recycling program. CTR was paying $7 per ton, and they are now paying $90 per ton. This is the recycling materials. This is a long-term problem and will affect our rates. We will be having a rate adjustment of 2.15% increase, and this increase is 53 cents on a 32-gallon. Other counties are increasing their rates by 5 to 10%. Last year, the county was given a raise that was equivalent to the Portland-Salem CPI, which is higher than the U.S. average, and Curry County cities received a lower rate based on the U.S. average CPI. This year, the county will receive the same CPI increase as Curry County cities. I think you remember when we had a discrepancy last year, and I did talk them into having the same rate. So we will have the lower rate here in the unincorporated areas. We would have received a rate increase of 3.9% if the U.S. average CPI rate was used, or I should say Salem Portland average was used. CTR will not be burning yard waste, so they are looking at shipping yard waste, or will take it to Medford. Another rate change occurred when waste is taken to the transfer site. Yard waste up to 5 yards will be $3 per yard rather than $13.80 per load, which is pretty good because some people brought in trunk loads of waste and ended up paying paying $13.80 even though they had very little. Also, old motor oil can be taken to the transfer for no charge. It used to cost $1.50 a gallon. So they've been really good to work with. And one thing I forgot to ask them is if the 2.15 increase is going to be based on our last year's increase, thereby making it a greater rate increase than the cities. So maybe I'll deal with that later. So that's my report, and we are finished with this meeting.
Till the 1:30 public hearing.
1:30, where we will be having the public hearing. So
I'll be calling
we're
in,
in
Madam
recess
Chair.
till 1:30, and you're going to be calling in?
Yes, thanks.
Okay.
We have a neighbor,
Well,
her
that's what
friends that are
university
going
is.
to
My
Eugene.
grandkids want a tour.
Okay, we're now coming back into our meeting. We're going to be having a public hearing regarding Curry County Zoning Ordinance CCZO Amendment 1801 to modify CCZO sections 1.070, 1, 3, and 7C regarding Planning Commission size, geographic organization of Planning Commission members, and duration of terms. Carolyn Johnson, Community Development Person, will be leading us in that discussion.
Who's present?
People present are Commissioner Huxley, Commissioner Gold, myself, Council Huddle, and Commissioner Boyce will be here by phone. Perhaps. Well, I heard a little ring over here.
I think he just,
Commissioner?
Whose phone is that? Is that yours?
That's our phone here.
Can you answer it?
Commissioner Boyce.
okay, let me get one more try. All right.
Well, I heard a ring. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, we're calling him. Okay, so we tried what? Is the third time the charm?
Court Boyce, this is the Curry County Board of Commissioners hearing room.
Yeah, I can't hear. Let me, if I call on the other phone, I think I get better reception. Can I try that? 10 seconds here?
Sure. Do you know the number?
I do, 3207.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm having trouble here, but I'm going to hang up and try and call. Thank you.
All right.
Did we get the, that jack fixed, speaker jack?
I don't know. Well, we can either wait for Commissioner Boyce or... Oh, that might be something to answer. This is the Commissioner hearing room.
I can hear. Thank you.
Okay.
Struggle, but we got through.
Okay, we now have Commissioner Boyce on the phone, and we're starting off with Carolyn Johnson, Director of the Planning Commission, or Planning Department, sorry.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to give you a little bit of background. It's reflected in your staff report. Earlier this year, the board provided some direction that the Planning Commission formulate a recommendation about the size and the geographic origination of the Planning Commission members and duration of terms. That's specified in zoning ordinance sections 1.07, 01, 3, and 7C through 1. Following that meeting, the Planning Commission held a hearing and recommended that the board retain the current standard that you have, which is 9 members. and all the language that's currently included in the zoning ordinance to retain it as is. In March of this year, during a board discussion matter, I shared the Planning Commission's comments with you, and the board then adopted a motion to modify the size of the commission from 9 to 5 members. You did that after taking a look at the state regulations that specified you could have 5, 7, or 9 members. And that's outlined here in this staff report as well. So following your direction, we prepared an ordinance amending section 1.07013 and 7C 1 through 3 and adding a C4. What this would do would establish a 7-member planning commission. 6 of those members would have 4-year terms, and 2 of those people would be from each area of the county. And 1 member would have a 2-year term, with each area represented every 2 years, for 2 years, every 6 years, subject to the availability of qualified applicants.
So you start off with the one with the 2 years, and then the next time that one's replaced, would that be 4 years? So then you're going to have the...
You would do a 2-year sequence every 2 years.
Every 2 years?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
so that's your rover?
yeah.
Okay.
So if you look on page 2 of the staff report, it outlines in a legislative scratch out how this would be amended. The last item, 7C4, I would like to suggest a change, and Commissioner Huxley pointed out to me that this language is probably not as clear as it could be, and I agree with him. So I put together something modifying it that talks about the individual that would only serve for 2 years, and I'd like to hand that out as part of the record.
I don't know whether Commissioner Huxley has his paperwork with him, but you might want to read that so that... Okay.
Commissioner Boyce, I'll read this out loud to you, okay?
Thank you, yes.
Going back to the idea of one individual serving for 2 years, the replacement language on number 4, I'll read it to you. It says, one individual shall be appointed from any area of the county referenced in 1.070 7C 1 through 3, which is the preceding sections that talk about the boundaries of the 3 areas, for a period of 2 years. For the subsequent 2 years, an individual from another area shall be appointed. For the following 2-year period, an individual from an area not previously represented in the preceding 4 years shall be appointed. This pattern shall be repeated every 6 years. All appointments shall be subject to the availability of qualified applicants as determined by the board.
Okay, so in other words, you're saying that the rover is going to be rotated
Yes.
so that it'll be equal
Right.
from each area? Okay.
Right. So that's how it would work. I think that's about all I have. But, I'm sorry. Go
Have the
ahead.
ordinance number.
Yeah, I would look to Mr. Jesuit to give me an ordinance number on this. You don't have one? Okay.
Well, it was at the bottom. It was at the bottom of the page. It said ordinance or ORS 215, and it wasn't 230. It was 030.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was 203. I thought you meant that.
No, it was 030, not 203. It's 215.030.
Yes, you're right. Okay. I thought you were referring to the ordinance number that I'm have in front of you
Oh,
to
no,
take
I'm
action
sorry.
on.
No.
I don't have that ordinance number at this time,
No.
but it would be assigned after you, if you decide to take action, that number would be assigned.
Okay.
So I'm here to answer any questions if you have them.
Does anybody have any questions?
Public comment?
Then we'll open it up for public comments.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
And I think Bob Morrow has a public comment.
Bob Morrow, Langlois, Oregon. I'm the current chair of the Planning Commission, and I would like to go back to the point where the Planning Commission made its recommendation to this body that the status quo be maintained. You know, I'm still looking at this recommended changes here and wondering what it is exactly that the Commission is trying to fix by taking this action. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I think we may be actually creating more difficulties for the Planning Commission if you do make these changes. I know the topic of the quorum not being met very often was one of the motivations for this to be considered, and the numbers looking back since Carolyn became the director, it just doesn't bear out that the quorum issue is a major concern. I think only 3 times in her entire duration here has a quorum been an issue, and 2 of those times when we actually did have a full 9 membership at that. So that is not a motivation for trying to change this. Again, what are we trying to fix? If we go down to 7 members, you're reducing the breadth of knowledge that can be brought to the Planning Commission. As the chair, I appreciate the diversity that we have in that room, and by reducing that, you're restricting the knowledge base that we can make decisions on. The roving component is creating a situation where you are unbalancing representation in the county for 2/3 of a cycle, this 6-year cycle. Now, looking at the membership we have now, everybody has, except for 2 members, have gone for multiple 4-year terms. And that is a massively powerful knowledge base to have people with that level of experience. But we also have found out recently that it is difficult to find qualified people to step up to the plate. And expecting to find somebody every 2 years from a different district to take that short 2-year cycle, it's not going to work, realistically. People that are volunteering for this are in for the long haul. After 2 years, they're not going to come back. It's going to be the difficulty, so you're going to end up practically with only 6 people. I think the correction, if you want to make a change to try and stabilize the quorum issue, is to change the definition of, well, we don't even have a definition of quorum in the code right now. If you added language on a quorum that indicated, as Chair Huxley used when we last had this topic in this room, not the total number of seats, but the actual people sitting in those seats. So if we do have the 9 members that the current structure suggests, and I support, but we only have 7 seated at that time, the quorum could be 5. Or excuse me, 4. Not the 5 of the 9. Are you following me on that?
Yes, but we can't change, in my opinion, and I'm not going to speak a legal opinion, but we can't change what a quorum is, definition or not. It's a majority, and it addressed that also in the Public Records and Meetings Manual. Even though it's an unwritten specific definition, it's understood to be a majority of the total number of positions in that body. So if there are 3, a quorum is 2. If there are 5, a quorum is 3. Doesn't matter how many people are there. It's the total number of members of that particular body or that committee or commission.
So in that case, if you had a planning commission of 9 seats, nine
Quorum is
opportunities.
5.
But if you only have 7 that are actually
Four.
placed.
A quorum is then 4.
So the distinction I'm trying to make is, and I believe it would be possible for you to write into the code, is that if you have 9 positions, 7 are actually placed people in those positions, you could use the 7 while you looked for the additional 2 people to fill them.
So I have a question. You have some vacancies right now on the board, is that correct?
That's correct, and in fact,
from what area? The South?
yes.
Okay,
And we have
so
two commissioners who are, 2 commissioners that are up for reappointment, and yes, and so they're applying for their second 4-year term.
is that in both instances, South and North? Because I recall that there were like at least 2 from the South that were applying. I think Freeman and...
You have 2 current members are applying. One's from the South, one's from the North, and then you have a new applicant from the South.
Okay, that's what I thought.
So you have basically 3 people that are coming up, and that would be a total of 8. So who are you going to eliminate? And who are you going to turn into only a 2-year term?
Commissioner Huxley?
Bob, I think also in this language, and I think it was in the language that part of the language that was originally proposed to your the possible dilemma of the 2-year term. It ends with the pattern, all appointments shall be subject to the availability of qualified applicants as determined by the board, so that if you have this floating one, if you will, the one that's 2 years, and the next 2-year term, the applicants from, and let's say they're in the second 2-year period. Okay, so that's hypothetically it's Central. That the first one was from Central. It could have been from South, Central, or North.
Sure.
If it was from the Central, the second 2-year period will be either or the South or the North. But if applicants aren't from or don't come forward or deemed qualified, then the existing position area is certainly opened again. It's unsaid, but it is open. So if we don't have those applicants, as we've had a shortage over the years of people that wanted to donate or contribute a lot of time, it doesn't disqualify that person just because they served the 2 years in that term or in that area and they're the only interested qualified candidate. They would be, no doubt, or the board would have the option of reappointing them for lack of qualified candidates in the other 2 areas. So it's not that 2 years and that's it necessarily. Okay.
And I'm going to
potentially
disagree on your reasoning on the 2 years. Sometimes people don't want to be committed for 4 years. They're happier to be committed for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure I agree with your reasoning on that issue.
Okay. Well, I'm just looking at the current makeup, and since I came on 6 years ago, it's been a very stable membership, and it has been individuals who have taken the long-term commitment and re-up for multiple terms. And I just see the 2-year process as being a real potential impediment. It maybe not, but there again, too.
Of course, having a 4-year term may be an impediment for some individuals. And then I was also going to ask you, you said 3 times there was no quorum, but how many meetings were there during that time?
27, I believe, is what I counted.
That's how many meetings? Okay,
Yeah.
so about a ninth of the time you had no quorum.
Not even.
Okay.
But again, looking at the body, our recommendation is that you maintain the status quo and prefer to see that. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments of Carolyn?
No?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Commissioner Boyce.
I thank you. Just since there's, pretty even split here, and so, I'm going to vote no if we do go ahead and have a vote, don't postpone. Just to, I heard Mr. Morrow say that if it isn't broke, don't fix it, and so I know it's complicated, but that's the basis for my opposition, at least at this date today.
Okay. Any further comments? So, council, I would say we either get a motion to change it, or does it just, if there's no motion, do we just keep it as is? Council Huddle.
Correct. I mean, you have in front of you, if I'm not mistaken, an order to adopt an amendment, an amended ordinance. And then I've provided you with a revised order to adopt the amendments. And then Director Johnson has provided you with a revision to the proposed amendment. So if there were an order to adopt the revision, it would be to a motion to adopt the revised order, including the amendment to the ordinance as provided by Director Johnson.
Director Johnson, do you have any feelings on this issue, that pro or con, or?
Well, your planning director, whoever they may be, will work with whoever, you appoint. That's part of what being a director is about, or working as a staffer is about.
So you have no feelings either way?
From my experience, working with a smaller number is somewhat easier, but that's just me personally. That not every planning director feels that way. So I think you could go either way. There's so many different models for planning commissions that I've seen in the past. Where I came from, we actually had a 5-member commission with an alternate. So if anybody was absent, you had to report out at least a month ahead you were going to be absent, and the alternate then would be contacted and come and.
So you would be able to accomplish what you needed to
So
accomplish.
in that setting, that system worked very well. So there's many ways to do this.
Okay. So do I have a motion to approve the amended ordinance?
Chair, I would motion to modify the Curry County zoning ordinance section 1.070 subsection 1, 3, and 7C regarding the planning commission size as documented in this proposal, with the exception of the revised language in membership of the committee section 1.0704 as was proposed in this modified document that was passed out to us, and with the correction of the attachment 1 being ordinance or ORS 215-.030 and not 230.
Okay. Do we have a second? I'll second that. Any further discussion? Since there's no further discussion, call for the question.
Aye.
Aye.
No.
Okay. Passes 2 to 1. Thank you for dropping by, and Mr. Morrow, and for your service. A long time.
See you next time.
Okay. Gosh, I think we've hit a couple of records today.
So are we?
We are now
Adjourned?
adjourned.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Better make it official.